지만 인간이 인구 조선 대중 지지다 년류 주죠. 면은 대제 제법 중앙고를 범주지 단치 몸주지 단 숨지다마 면은 인간이 진다칸에 수혜자 세바다 군제제나 중진 나세 중동고 몸 숨주 쏘고다 니지 시동 자다 주주다마 면은 인간이 현대 중진 나세 dom고 몸 숨주 수영하다 칙지 숨동 주자 구주 고지 면은 인간이 대선 남네 태제 중동고 숨붐 시지 응아동 제자 두주 동아 공세 중가시 나세 전동고 붐 자주 자구다 칙지 숨동 둔자 니주제주 송제 남제 지세 닝에리 최지 나가다 쇠제 제바 공세 진다 중화 표현 어서 동고 나분 구지 지동 담바 면람 닝에리 닝구 균중가 좀라 초대소소 군제 nem바 비슈와 군제의 군제고 숨동 니자리 피변 어서 동고 붐 숨주 쏘고다 니지 숨동 주장합주 담바 공세 송가니 동고 붐 십리 생하다 칙지 시동 주장합주 담바 중송 카답지 라데 고봄 십주 샤숨다 구지 구동 자매 둔주 튼주 지주갑 년구 수주라나 자된 타진 도근 대와 잠니 시대 대변 공사 장관 신보소 의 리메 제제 담아는 구대되니 투지 제공 hun주 주바당 댄시 라왕게 되는 르소당 르당외 라니 남제 체라 통면에 제사 디지 지질 함에도 장진 다네 근데 대상 주 군제 대외 공원 유도 도바당 대선 제도나라 파조 제네스 제수 송에 투면 장주 제스와 천년제 세소와 대화라 계좌 초바 연구 도담 투모네 니동 주규 다반입에 제니슈다 필 디다한다 세라学习了那 간에 포장이 고린나네 차주 담배 돌아데 디 짜르세주요래 깔로 디 최주 만나 바는 이제 강 마마 페로치 디 네베돈 가능도 디로 공장해 보시오 아니요 근데 디 계제진에 디 세라 学了 디 가서 계사 대 최주와 지라페면 왔다 디 간에 포장이 대 도구나제 디나요 장고주 가공 시송이 대 나중 어디서는 다 쇼게 깔롬 나조디 소주 나조디 짜르세 제네디 고리나 요리디 두올란다 줄라가니가라 카수조 레레 요리 딜라 슈주바 강 마마 페로 지송도 계사대 페메와다 시라 세당 예바도디 강 마마 페로 지스 까난 거 딜로 공자 용어주 디지 잠네 뒤조 뭐지 샵종도 규대 로상 결례네 차제 주는 제대로 농인도 시진 남는 장고죠 뭐 그제 저리죠 그제 배지 수리는 뭐죠 그제 바제네 랑에 대해서 뉴도는 제리자와도 배당하게 되나 뉴네 뉴스에 왔다는 저라 특수 내면신의 시디바 론조와 하버 뒤주조와 결론 로상 결론 로상 된지다 저 뭐지 스미트에 되는 제가 정말 재산 드리면 어디에 대해서 유남의 조사 뉴도와 세준도 주주와 팔로상 템바다 마트린 라소베 최대 이상도 주어지는 마자지단 근유력 근육 고주리 제필
呀，马上就没事了。对啊，他搞的巴拉什么的不得说。年度修，做了个些也是真在干业了，到了偏把上了。看到呀，那那个做了那么困难，那种这种年度修就是上节经的用到了超产了。看给电视的我就搞万买吧，见买吧，千万买吧，大买吧，万买吧这。他在这边电视面这个年纪现在吧，做了3年，他没得了超产了。也的，看给都是那种呢，到我都是旁边去，他们去那边这边扩张的了，长在了。哎呀，啊。
So homage to the Gautama, who moved by his compassion, taught us to hold sacred dharma to rid us of all distorted views. Looks like most of the people have gathered. So one of the 17 Nalanda Panditas Master Bhavavieka's text. The text contains a short biography of like colophon. So Khenpo Kungpa Wangchu writes that His Holiness the Dalai Lama has expressed his wish to receive transmission of one of the Tengyur texts, of which you have the transmission, and expressed that if Bhavavieka's essence of the middle way, based on, if you could write an annotated commentary based on Bhavavieka's own commentary, a blaze of reasoning, and it will actually create a transmission of the essence of the middle way. And so, in order to help the Dharma, His Holiness intended to help the Dharma and asked me to write a annotated commentary. So do your best to write the annotated commentary. And so Kim Pembakunga Wangchuk, his name is Ngawangkunga Wangchuk, at the age of 83, respectfully carried out this wish of His Holiness the Dalai Lama by reading the Tibetan commentaries, even though his leg was broken, and at the time getting medication in Taiwan. So we were around page the Tibetan. So we were at verse number 260 of the 3rd chapter, which says, or an existence which is grasped by a false cognition is considered unreal because it exists. The existence is perceived by knowledge having conceptual construction, just like the cognition in which a filament in the air is seen. A filament of air is seen as water, which means mirage. So His Holiness seems to have lost his page. At 3:30 I got up and did my prayers, and I was not sleepy, dozing off while I was reading the text. Now I can't find the page. So just like the cognition in which a mirage is seen. So I wish to say that the 400 verses of Arya Deva, which forms one of the 3 texts, the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, Madhyamaka Avatara, and the 400 verses. The 400 verses says that those who doubt about the hidden teachings of the Buddha, for them, in order to dispel their doubt, they should be explained emptiness. So in Abhisamaya Alamkara, as part of the instructions, the first instruction that is said to be given is that of the instruction on the 2 truths. So what happened now? What happened to the page? So the 2 truths are the basis for explaining the teaching of the Buddha. As we usually say, the 2 truths at the basis level, the 2 parts, and then the parts comprising wisdom and method, and then the 2 Buddha bodies as the result. So when we talk about the 2 truths, there is this understanding of appearance, the disparity between appearance and reality. Many of the problems that we create or that happen to us is because of this gap between the truth, the reality, and the apparent. So if you look deeper into the reality, then you'll see the thing differently. For example, someone gets really angry and then kill others and consider themselves victorious. But if you really think closely, you cannot overcome all your enemies. They were great heroes like kings, ministers, and so forth. There was no one who had become totally victorious over all their enemies. So if you're in this 21st century, also, if you think that you wish to overcome all your enemies, there's no way you can do that. So, of course, we may feel anger or hatred towards our so-called enemies, and one wish to overcome them, but it's narrow-minded. But if you really look at the situation from a wide angle, then you will actually find the so-called adversaries and enemies to be your friends. So in the world today, when explaining the two truths, the Buddha himself also taught the dependent related origination. So it is really related to our environment as well. So we really, as beings living in the environment, want to have happiness. And for that, we need also to take care of the external environment as well, to keep them healthy. And then the reality of the world today is that the Easterners are related or dependent on the Westerners, and the West is dependent on the East. And so if you really understand this interconnectedness, interrelationship, you will really benefit. And for our physical health, mental health, and peace of mind is very important. And similarly, the physical health is also important for our mental health, for happiness, joy. So we should not leave things at the level of appearance, but look at things deeper. And when you see the deeper reality of interconnectedness of things, then you see the significance of the understanding of interdependence between us, amongst ourselves. So, of course, there are many different religious traditions in the world today. There are those of the theistic religious traditions. And it's also would be uneasy to say that things were things have come about through without any causes and conditions. And so, philosophically, you will see that the teaching of the Buddha, when you look at it from the point of view of the dependent origination, you'll see its weight. So there was verse that I quoted earlier, which says that those who doubt the teaching of the Buddha, in terms they should be explained the teaching on the basis of emptiness. And then what has this understanding of emptiness to do is to overcome our ignorance, and how to overcome ignorance, Aryadeva says, just as the physical faculty permeates all other sensory faculties, likewise that of ignorance or confusion permeates all other afflictive mental afflictions, and therefore to overcome it one should do that through the understanding of dependent origination. And therefore we also have the dependent origination depicted that in terms of the 12 links of dependent origination that are usually drawn in front of the temples. So it starts with a blind woman, symbolizing or representing that of the ignorance, and ending with that of the a dead body, dead end. So how do we actually, how are we led into this cycle of existence? we are led into this cycle of existence through ignorance. Because of ignorance, we create the formative karma, and that leaves imprints on the consciousness, and then we are reborn and so forth. And so, when the Buddha wished to point to the cessation of this vicious circle, then he pointed to I mean, in the painting, he's shown as pointing at his finger at moon. So it seems that the Buddha didn't have any other way to point to cessation. So all our problems are because of ignorance. And due to ignorance, we have this clinging to some kind of independent existence of things, which leads to misconception or inappropriate mentation, and that in turn leads to the mental afflictions of attachment, anger, and so forth. So how do we go about with the practice of the teaching of the Buddha? Again, in the 400 verses, it says, in the beginning, get rid of the non-meritorious actions. In the middle, get rid of the notion of a self, and in the end, get rid of all distorted views. And those who are able to do that are wise. And so, in terms of gaining cessation or liberation, we have the teaching of dependently related origination of things. And then, with regard to the first line, what it shows is that of gaining the factors to gain higher rebirth. So there are 16 factors, as mentioned in Ratnavali by Master Nagarjuna. So they are avoiding the 10 non-virtuous actions, the 3 of mind, the 4 of speech, and 3 of body. And then avoiding harm. So, of course, when telling lie or indulging in divisive talk and so forth, you are also harming others. But apart from what is already counted in the 10 non-virtuous actions, any other action which harm others come under this. And then this next one is venerating those worthy of veneration, even in terms of worldly mundane practice, those who are worthy of veneration, such as parents, and also venerating one's masters and teachers. And then next is avoiding wrong living, and then comes respectfully giving respectfully, so that when you give alms to beggars or poor people, you don't look down upon them, but give your gifts or presents respectfully. And also that of practicing love or loving affection. So these 16 factors, and then the next one is that of not drinking alcohol. And then, so the first line shows how to attain the higher rebirth, and the second line of the 400 verses shows that of attaining liberation or definite goodness, which comes about through the meditation on empty selflessness. So get rid of the notion of a self in the middle, and finally get rid of not only those that of the self-grasping conception, which grasp at some independent existence, but also to overcome all your cognitive obscurations as well. For that, the wisdom realizing emptiness should be complemented and supported by bodhicitta with the help of a great amount of merit which comes through the practice of bodhicitta, which is rooted in affectionate love and compassion. So with the support of bodhicitta, when you your meditation on emptiness is the meditation on emptiness with the full view or full aspect. And so first you need to gain understanding of what emptiness means and the path. And as I explained yesterday also, we should progress along the path as referred by the Heart Sutra mantra, Gate Gate Para Gate Para Samgate Bodhiswaha. So this mind, which is covered and tinged with or tainted by the self grasping at some true existence, should be overcome. So when you develop bodhicitta, of course, you are intending to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. And therefore, your aim is to help others by seeking omniscience. As Master Nagarjuna says, the twofold... Through this virtue, may beings accumulate the two stores of merit and wisdom, and through that may they attain the two Buddha bodies. And so, with the help of bodhicitta, you engage in the practice of the giving, morality, and so forth, these 5 perfections, and then also you develop this understanding of selflessness, beginning with the coarse understanding of the selflessness, so that you accumulate merit with the bodhicitta and the other perfections, and then wisdom, accumulate wisdom through this understanding of the selflessness. And so, through these 2 stores of merit and wisdom, what you attain is the 2 Buddha bodies, the Rupakaya, which is the physical dimension, and that of the Dharmakaya, the truth body of the Buddha. And therefore, you see the importance and the significance of emptiness, understanding of emptiness in the beginning, middle, and the end. And therefore, as I quoted Master Tsongkhapa yesterday, the intelligent aspirants should gain a firm conviction in the essential teachings of the Buddha through reasoning, by training their mind and themselves in the eyes of intelligence. So although Tsongkhapa wrote his Lamrim according to the Kadam tradition, but when he deals with that of the reliance on a guru, he mainly uses reasoning. In other Lamrim texts, the emphasis is, there is so much emphasis on following the teacher's instruction, whatever the teacher instructs you. Whereas Tsongkhapa says that if your teacher says something which does not accord with the classic text, then you should not necessarily listen to the instruction. Whereas if it accords with the reason and the scriptures, then you should. There was a teacher in one of the kamsens of Drepung, and so one lama, there were many lamas in that kamsen, and the leader or the prefect of that kamsen said that if you wish to the lamas, to the reincarnate lamas, if you wish me to have a pure vision, please do not do whatever you like to do. If you wish me to follow your instructions, please don't say whatever you wish to say. So the late Gen Lobsang Gyatso of the Institute of Dualities used to tell me this story. And so Lamrim Chemo lays down the foundation of the practice, whereas Jerimbuche touches on the Four Noble Truths very briefly in his Lamrim Chemo, and he says that in all the scriptures of the basic vehicle as well as Mahayana, this is taught very extensively. And so, Master Tsongkhapa says that when when leading disciples through the path, you should actually base your teachings on the Four Noble Truths. And therefore, he explains on the basis of the understanding of two truths and the Four Noble Truths. So otherwise, just to begin the teaching of Lamrim with the principle of taking refuge in the Three Jewels, it only is aimed at the Buddhists. Whereas if you actually explain the teaching, begin the teaching to people, beginning with that of emptiness, then it can actually cover not only Buddhists but non-Buddhists as well. And so Tsongkhapa's style of writing is marvelous. So the 5 texts on Madhyamaka philosophy written by Master Tsongkhapa, the insight sections of the Lamrim, the 2 Lamrim texts, and then that of the differentiating the definitive and the provisional teachings, and then the commentary on Madhyamaka Avatara and commentary on Madhyamaka Karika. And so within the Buddhist philosophical system in Buddhism, there are those of the Vaibhashikas and Suttantikas who do not assert the selflessness of phenomena, whereas the Chittamatra and Madhyamaka assert selflessness of phenomena as well. So if you look at these 4 schools of thought within Buddhism, you'll see you should be able to see the significance of how they can serve as the different rungs of a ladder, leading you from the bottom to the top. And so the study of the Madhyamaka texts, such as Madhyamaka Karika, the 400 verses, and the Madhyamaka Avatara are very important to study. These are very important. And then also this essence of the middle way. So His Holiness is talking about taking the tea hot, otherwise you'll have Google stomach, rumbling stomach. If you drink cold tea, your stomach will have you'll have a rumble, and you'll be competing with the thunder. So the main teaching, the people to whom I'm giving this teaching are the Tibetans mainly, and then also we have Westerners to whom Buddhism is not their traditional religion as such, and people in the West are taking interest in Buddhism, which is something new. So sometimes when I give talks and teachings on Buddhism in the West, I feel a little uncomfortable. Though for the Westerners, the Buddhism is not their traditional religion of their forebears, yet in the age of communication and exchange, and also because of being scientific-minded, people have taken interest in the teaching of the Buddha. And then the Chinese, you are traditionally Buddhist. As I said yesterday also, Tangsen Lama Xuanzang brought the teaching Buddhism from Nalanda, so we follow the same Nalanda tradition. So the three texts of Madhyamaka that I mentioned earlier, Mula Madhyamaka Karika, 400 verses, and the Madhyamaka Avatara, if you could actually pay more attention to study them, it's very important to do that. Because, as I said yesterday, it's very important to develop a faith in the teaching through reason and understanding. Thus, through the refutation of the real as well as unreal cognition as well as the object of cognition, for the wise man, cognition, which is beyond conceptual construction, arises as a consequence of non-arising. So when you assert production from self or itself and the production from others through philosophical sophistry, of course you will not find them. So there is no production from self and others intrinsically. Emptiness on its part lacks self in the form of emptiness. Accordingly, the wise man does not see emptiness as emptiness. Even the existence appearanceless as grasped in. So according to the wise man does not see emptiness as emptiness. What it means is that if you actually conceive emptiness as being something independently, objectively existent, that is wrong. And therefore, in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, there are 16 different emptinesses that are taught. So looking at viewing emptiness as having some independent existence is a wrong conception. Even the existence, the existing appearanceless grasp in a constructless cognition is not reality, as it is because it is what is to be grasped. Just like the cognition that the moon is in water is seen as the moon. Cognition which is beyond conceptual construction and which has as its object that object which is beyond conceptual construction is considered unreal because cognition has it has non-self selfness, etc. as its nature, just like cognition having conceptual construction, because an object of cognition is not proved in any way. Those who know the truth understand that where even constructless cognition does not arise as unequal truth. No object of knowledge exists at all, so the Buddhas who know reality say that the reality that has no equal is object without which not even a non-conceptual cognition arises. So when we talk about the Buddha, Buddha is someone who knows everything, and because in order to become a Buddha, we should get rid of the veil which covers our mind, which is the cognitive obscuration, and that is done through the understanding and insight into emptiness. So no object of knowledge exists at all, so the Buddhas who know reality, that the reality has no equal, is the object about which not even non-conceptual construction arises. The non-arising of cognition, which is called the Buddha because it is understanding of the reality, is the primary Buddha because it is the understanding that is no understanding, and because it dispels the sleep of concepts. Or he is called Buddha because he finishes recognizing the things that have to be recognized and so forth, because he understands equality, or because he opens the lotus minds of fortunate people with manifestations. Without apprehending the equality of an object, the Buddha understands the equality of different dharmas, because dharmas are equal in the sense that they do not arise or cease, or the Buddha understands the equality of self and other. Therefore, the Buddha is called some Buddha among gods and human beings, because the Buddha understands equality without equality. without understanding equality, dharmas cannot be subtracted or added. So the Buddha is called the Tathagata because the Buddha has understood or gone in this way according to the dharma nature. The Buddha is called Sugata because without understanding he has understood what needs to be understood. The Buddha has understood it thoroughly, completely, and without falling into extremes. The Buddha is immeasurable because he understands the immeasurable. The Buddha is incalculable because he cannot be grasped. He is unthinkable because he cannot be an object of thought. He is incomparable because he cannot be compared. He is indefinable because it is utterly impossible to specify that he is one thing rather than another. He cannot be displayed because there is no way to display him. He is happy because there is nothing to harm him. He is eternal because of two reasons. For two reasons, he is eternally free from appearance and thus is completely free from concepts, and eternally accomplished what is good. He's peaceful because he's empty of identity. He has no distinguishing mark because he has no identity, because he does not serve as distinguishing mark for anyone else, and because he has no distinguishing mark. Because he has no distinguishing mark, he has appearances, and what? He has no appearances. For liberated practitioners who want to see him, he has no distinguishing mark or appearance. He does not provide a foundation for thought because he has no distinguishing mark. He does not conceptualize. He cannot be conceptualized because he does not provide a foundation for thought. He is not subject of conceptual diversity because he cannot be conceptualized. He is not an object because he cannot be apprehended, does not arise, does not have any form, and does not change. The Buddha is luminous, equal to non-equal, not equal, unlimited, non-conceptual, and without characteristic. Like a space, heroic beings see him without seeing. The bodhisattvas live without concept, without effort, and their eyes are clear. They pay homage to the Lord without any homage, reflection, or words. To them also we pay sincere homage. Words such as Buddha are used metaphorically in a way that corresponds to the Buddha's progress. But ultimately the Buddha is considered indescribable because he cannot be conceptualized in any way. His speech comes to an end. It is not accessible to thought. Ideas come to an end and knowledge becomes silent. This is the dharma body of the body, Buddhas who have an endless store of merit and no countless objects of cognition, and it is happy. It is the happy cessation of conceptual thought, diversity. The Buddha is invisible to a physical eye and invisible to divine eye, and he cannot be seen by conceptual or non-conceptual cognition. The Buddha is inaccessible to logicians as heaven is to sinners. Detachment is to those who are passionate, and the sun is to those who have been born blind. The dharma body is something that exists. It is not something that is absent. It is not something that both exists and is absent. It is not something different from these two, and yet it is not different from the four options. It is not it is subtle, great. It is not subtle, great, or unique, and is neither far nor near. Nothing is born or manifested from it in any way. It is the Supreme Brahman that even gods such as Brahma do not grasp. The sage who spoke the truth said that this Dharma body is the ultimate truth. Is worshipped by sages and saints such as Arya Avalokiteshvara and Arya Maitreya with the discipline of no worship. We consider the Dharma body to be the Tathagata's body because it is not different in nature from the Tathagata, and because it is the reality that the Tathagata has understood, and we do not consider it to be anyone else's body because others do not understand it. When a practitioner practices this Brahman practice and lives in the Brahman state without any apprehension, what can this practitioner's mind desire, hate, or be ignorant of? How can the bodhisattvas suffer any of the pain that comes from losing something that is desired or gaining something that is not desired? Such a bodhisattva is as unstained by the conditions of this world as a lotus is unstained by water. A bodhisattva does not leave samsara. A bodhisattva is free from the harm in samsara. A bodhisattva does not attain in nirvana, but it is as if a bodhisattva were located in nirvana. A bodhisattva is not burned by the fire of defilements. Even though a bodhisattva is defiled, the bodhisattva is defiled in the way that the space is defiled. A bodhisattva has no mind and has no mind, and the bodhisattva has reached the attainment of cessation. The bodhisattva has climbed a mountain peak of wisdom and is free from grief, but looks with compassion on ordinary people who suffer and are burned by grief. They have been wounded. Then, with an eye that is moist with compassion, the bodhisattva sees that the wisdom eye of ordinary people eyes of ordinary people have been covered by an imaginary net created by art of conceptual thought. They have been wounded by the arrows of birth, old age, sickness, and death, and they have become sick. They are weak, miserable, and unfortunate, and they have no protector and no final refuge. Trying to extinguish suffering, they have fallen into a river of suffering. With deluded minds, they have continued to increase the course of suffering. The ambrosia of reality, the happy cessation of conceptual diversity, is as clear as the autumn sky. The ordinary people whose cognition functions in such a way that they do not see this reality have no wisdom eye. An accomplished bodhisattva who is tormented by compassion and dedicated to the welfare of these ordinary beings has a mind as hard as a diamond and is the greatest of beings. The bodhisattva practices the discipline of generosity, moral conduct, patience, fortitude, meditation, and wisdom. After practicing these 2 kinds of wisdom and the 6 kinds of recollections at an appropriate time and in ways that is appropriate to the bodhisattvas to help all sentient beings, the bodhisattva sends forth rivers with lovely water of pure merit from the mountain of generosity and so forth. The bodhisattva always removes all the suffering of poverty and begging by sacrificing everything, whether it is part of bodhisattva's body or not, to all those who in need. The bodhisattva constantly delights and fulfills the hopes of those who are in need, and the bodhisattva always serves as wishing tree rich with inexhaustible fruit. When a bodhisattva is born in good realm, the bodhisattva brings happiness and benefit to all others. Or when the bodhisattva is born intentionally in another realm, it is because that also brings happiness and benefit to others. In each realm, the bodhisattva has a group of followers that is devoted, pure, patient, and limitless, and the bodhisattva is filled like the ocean by the many mouthed rivers of merit. When a bodhisattva's mind is skillful and undistracted, and the bodhisattva naturally understands understands and discriminates objects of cognition, the bodhisattva remains as many eons as the bodhisattva wants. The bodhisattva has the understanding that comes from attaining innumerable immeasurable concentrations. The bodhisattva decorates endless world systems with ornaments. The bodhisattva displays ripening conduct by the application of artistic skill and action. The bodhisattva is born anyway. The bodhisattva born in any way bodhisattva wishes because of desire to benefit ordinary beings. The bodhisattva displays world systems filled with Buddha bodies. The bodhisattva displays perfect enlightenment at any time and in any Buddha field. The bodhisattva wishes that with the eye of knowledge, the bodhisattva sees the nature of every object of cognition. The bodhisattva has understood the distinction between attributes, and the bodhisattva has received a name and so forth. By yawning with power, the bodhisattva shakes innumerable worlds. At the time of different times, or at different times, the bodhisattva emits fire and water from his body. The bodhisattva spreads radiance in every direction to shock the gods. The bodhisattva manifests hells and so forth. The bodhisattva manifests assemblies of Buddhas who are like relatives of the world and sparkle with the jewel of immeasurable, extraordinary, inconceivable virtues. At will, the bodhisattva turns great mountains into gold, jewel, beryl, pearls, diamonds, and sapphires, and the bodhisattva makes fire cold. With a great body, the bodhisattva comes and goes anywhere, even though things that are made of a diamond and so forth, without any hindrance, miraculously and so instantaneously. The bodhisattva manifests endless world systems, entering into the bodhisattva's own body and into an atom without any harm to sentient beings. At will, the Bodhisattva shrinks world systems to the size of an atom and expands atoms to the size of world systems. The Bodhisattva also turns them upside down. Equipped with the appropriate size, splendor, color, voice, and behavior, the Bodhisattva enters the assemblies of gods such as Brahma to teach those who are ready to be taught. The Bodhisattva appears and disappears so that no one knows where the Bodhisattva is. Moved by compassion, the Bodhisattva overwhelms the power of others. At will, the Bodhisattva takes control of standing and speaking of beings. To those who lack insight, the Bodhisattva gives confidence and pleasure. The Bodhisattva sends out rays to soothe those who suffer in hell, and the Bodhisattva leads them to the same condition as the lords of gods and so forth. The Bodhisattva fills every direction with manifestations created for everyone who is ready to be taught, and Bodhisattva creates extraordinary pleasure with the jewel shower of teachings. At will, Bodhisattva sustains innumerable past, present, and future bodies, the completion of the Buddha fields, and the destruction and creation of innumerable world systems. Also, at will, the Bodhisattva sustains a Buddha field in the Bodhisattva's own body, the Bodhisattva's own body in that Buddha field, and the Buddha body in the Bodhisattva's own field. From the rays of light and the pores of the Bodhisattva's body, from musical instruments, from the sky, from manifestation come a sound that fills the world. The sound is delightful to hear, penetrating, clear, deep, broad, and as charming as the sound of a cuckoo. With this voice, the Bodhisattva speaks the Dharma to teach those who are ready to be taught. The Dharma is peaceful and has only the taste of quietude, but because of the convictions and faculties of listeners, Bodhisattva teaches it in many ways. The Bodhisattva knows where, how long, and which of many ascension beings have minds that are defiled, unwholesome, pure, pleasurable, painful, lower, middle, higher, or truly superior. The Bodhisattva has the cleverness to see all forms everywhere, including subtle things among the gods and manifestations, as well as gross things among the opposite. The Bodhisattva has a clear audience to hear the words spoken by gods, magical arrays, saints, and manifestations, as well as those spoken by human beings, words that are spoken far away and also the opposite. The Bodhisattva remembers the Bodhisattva's own and others' previous lives everywhere with the distinction of names, clans, and so forth, and the Bodhisattva causes others to remember. Everywhere, the Bodhisattva knows the death, transmigration, and rebirth of all the beings who are located in different realms as a result of various good and bad actions. The Bodhisattva teaches those who are ready to be taught by manifesting life into Shita, transmigration, entry into worm, enlightenment, and so forth. Without moving from the Bodhisattva's own field, the Bodhisattva intentionally manifests bodies in as many Buddha fields as there are grains, dust of innumerable world systems, and each body has an equally vast number of hands, heads, and tongues. Multicolored clusters of fragrant flowers as numerous as the sands of Ganges, as big as Mount Meru, and emitting rich, fine, sweet fragrance. So with these flowers, intending to bearing benefit to the world, the Bodhisattva worships the perfectly enlightened and awakened Buddhas with eyes moist with devotion and praises them continually with hymns. The Bodhisattva worships the Buddhas with innumerable jeweled parasols and canopies decorated with networks of pearls sparkling with jewel rays like sprouts and teeth. The Bodhisattva worships the Buddhas with peaked dwellings that have pleasant upper rooms and radiant pillars. These dwellings are hung with garlands of pearls constructed with a mass of different jewels and decorated with paintings. These peaked dwellings shine with hundreds of lamps with the light of radiant jewels. They are as high as the clouds and fill every direction with light. The accomplished Bodhisattva listens continuously to the Tathagata's manifested teaching and teaches it to others without dropping or adding as much as word or syllable. The Bodhisattva is exalted by the accumulation of merit and knowledge for innumerable countless eons, has completed the perfections, and is as a supreme person. The Bodhisattva becomes a Buddha and opens the mind of fortunate beings with the pure cleansing rays of teaching, just as the sun opens the blossoms in a pond of lotus. With the water of teaching, more cooling than the Himalayas, the moon, or the central woods. The Buddha puts out the fire of defilements in the minds of sentient beings. With the great boats of 3 vehicles, the Buddha speedily saves beings from the ocean of existence, where the waves of birth, transmigration, suffering, and the crocodiles of death. With the jewel streams of his eloquent phrases, the Buddha completely dispels the thirst and removes the world's beginningless poverty of good qualities. People wander in the forest of existence, and they have only their ignorance to show the way. The Buddha opens their wisdom eye and leads them to nirvana. With the spells of knowledge, the Buddha truly cures the people who have been bitten by the snake of defilements and are no longer conscious of their own welfare. The Buddha uses his teaching compassionately, like the sound of a drum, to awaken the living beings who have no one in the world to protect them and have long slept the sleep of ignorance. The Buddha conquers the 4 maras and frees those who have been long been bound by the chains of thirst in the prison of samsara. With a lovely ambrosia of wisdom, he brings satisfaction to beings who, like a fire, cannot be satisfied by anything, divine or human. In the assemblies, he sounds the lion's roar of emptiness and drives away the untamed heretics' pride of in their own wisdom, as if he were a lion driving away the passion of wild, rotting elephants. The Buddha's incomparable form body is surrounded by a fathom of light that has the appearance of a rainbow. Its splendor consists of permanent, radiant, complete primary and secondary characteristics. Its ornament is glory. It is charming to the mind and eyes. It surpasses all things beauty. With his form and with miraculous voice that has 60 attributes, the Buddha captivates the minds of all beings with body and voice. Like a wishing jewel, the Buddha assumes the universal form of all gods who have those who are ready to be taught. This, which has been described in the beginning of the majesty, the innumerable, immeasurable, astonishing mine of virtues, attained by the sage who follows this path. So here the resultant attainments are mentioned first, so that people could be inspired to attain them. And then this is like the Abhisamaya Alamkara dealing with the Buddha's qualities and so forth in the beginning, so that people would be inspired, beings would be inspired to generate that of mind of enlightenment with the chitta. Then the analysis of the reality according to the Shravakas, the 4th chapter. Those who have low aspirations cannot understand this difficult approach. Shaken by baseless fear, they make the following claims. The teacher's body is not the locus of non-conceptual cognition, because it is a body like the body of cowherd, so they say. The great awakening of Buddha is achieved by following the eightfold path, because it is awakening like the awakening of a student. Teacher cannot be omniscient because of the excellence of his faculties, just as we think that one can have different analytical insights. Even though there is no difference in the path, we think that obstacles to knowledge are removed by the same path, because they are mental obstacles, like obstacles that consist of defilements. So the opponent says, even in the Mahayana, you think that this path leads to the omniscience of a sage, because the Mahayana is different vehicle, like the Pratyeka Buddhayana. The Mahayana is not Buddha's teaching, because it improperly denies cause and effect, like the nihilistic view. The point is clinched because it is not included in the 18 schools. If a cognition apprehends something like a material form and is also aware of itself, it must exist. So someone who holds the doctrine of non-arising also contradicts perception. If he says that he does not contradict perception and common sense because he uses qualification, in reality things do not exist. To show that he is clown, we reply, then this faulty argument would be correct. It is ultimately correct to have sexual relations with a woman who is forbidden because she is a woman like another woman. The external sense media exist because a cognition arises with their image. So here in this chapter, Bhavavieka goes through the proofs to for Mahayana being the teaching of the Buddha. Then this faulty argument would be correct. It is ultimately correct to have sexual relations with a woman who is forbidden because she is woman, like another woman. There is another big fault. If he says that the vision of the Four Noble Truths is not true, then it is not true. Otherwise, the teaching of the Shravakas, Devas would be true, and that is not acceptable. The external sense media exists because the cognition arises with their image. The existence of an object of cognition should be just as acceptable to you as the existence of mind. If you do not think that the mind exists, then the world is not mind only. And if the world is your subject, there is no reason or example. And the Bhavavieka response, according to the approach explained earlier, the opponent's approach has gone wrong. The opponent cannot tolerate this and has spoken out, but his statements are unreasonable. This is what we think. We think that the teacher's cognition is non-conceptual because his cognition apprehends no self. Just as it has no self of persons as its object. The opponent's argument is refuted because it does not avoid contradiction when it denies the arising of functional cognition and so forth. Since there is no object of cognition, awakening is understood as the co-arising of cognition with regard to this object, because this no arising is consistent with the reality of the object. We think that the Buddha's cognition is free from concepts and of identity and so forth. It is called peaceful and so forth by superimposition concepts. Someone who practices a path that begins with the right vision has no vision, no thought, no speech, no action, no livelihood, no effort. No mindfulness and no concentration. Achieves the awakening of a Buddha, Shakyamuni, and since this is our position, either there is the fault of approving something that we have already accepted and should investigate in the practice. So the text also goes through the two Buddha bodies, the form body and the truth body, and within the form body there are those of the Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya, and the Dharmakaya is comprises the the Jnanakaya and the Svabhavika Kaya. For scholars who follow inference, reality does not contradict tradition, and they think of practice in exactly the same way. To understand this is to be the Buddha. Anything else is mother's candy. This is a decisive response to the claim that the Mahayana is not a Buddha's teaching. The aforementioned path is not sufficient to attain Buddha's awakening, because its awakening has to do with the aspects of suffering and so forth. Like the path of the Pratyeka Buddhas, either the opponent's position is contradicted by inference or the example is impossible. This path does not remove those obstacles. The cognitions of non-arising and cessation are not ultimately true because they are conceptual, like the erroneous cognition. What is awakening really about? This also responds to the reason in which the Mahayana is called a different vehicle. How can an arhat attain nirvana if he still has obstacles? If someone thinks that suffering arises, because suffering is not said to arise and cease, why not hold that if it arises it must be empty of identity of suffering, because it is conditioned like illusion or like the pure aggregates. What do you think is the truth of suffering, and what is right vision? A painful feeling is suffering, but why are birth and so forth suffering? If impermanence is suffering, then the cause of suffering and the path to the cessation of suffering also are suffering. The path of the basic vehicle alone cannot lead one to awakening, it says. To understand this, the Buddha teaches. So with regard to the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha gave the teaching on these four truths by mentioning or stating it 12 times. The aforementioned path is not sufficient to attain Buddha's awakening, because the awakening has not to do with the aspects of suffering and so forth, like the path of Pratyeka Buddhas. Either the opponent's position is contradicted and so forth. The cognition of non-arising and cessation are ultimately true because they are conceptual and like erroneous cognition. This also responds to the reason in Madhyana that in which Mahayana is called a different vehicle. How can an arhat attain nirvana if he still has obstacles? If the opponent thinks that Shravaka's liberation is like the Buddha, because Shravaka removes defiled ignorance, this is wrong, because neither the primary nor the unmanifested Buddha actually removes defiled ignorance. In the Mahayana, the path does not really lead to the awakening of a Buddha, because it has concepts and cognitive marks, like a path that is clearly mundane. Someone may say if the path is unreal, then it cannot cause the cessation of defilements because it is unreal. Just as the cognition that opposed is a man cannot cause the cessation. It is like a cognition that is a rope is a mass of vines, which serves as an antidote to a terrified person's mistaken idea that a rope is a snake. The reason is inconclusive and the opponent loses arguments. This also is an answer to the argument that the path is real, because it is an antidote to defilements, and the reason is not accepted because it is contradicted by a counter argument, because the teaching of the Mahayana beginning with the four truths are included in Tripitaka, literally Vinaya and so forth. The reason is unacceptable because the eightfold path to omniscience is taught in Mahayana. If someone thinks that suffering arises because suffering is said to arise and cease, why not hold that if it arises it must be empty of identity of suffering, because it is conditioned like illusion and pure aggregates. So regarding the Mahayana scriptures, the compilers of the Mahayana scriptures after the Buddha had passed away are mentioned, are said to be those of Manjushri, Maitreya, and Vajrapani, and so forth. So the reason to say that the Mahayana is not teaching of Buddha is not established, not valid. So the Mahayana teachings are contained in Sanskrit, written in Sanskrit. As I said before, in the Pali tradition, of course, there's great teaching on the Four Noble Truths and the 37 factors of enlightenment and so forth, but these are explained on the basis of scriptural authority, not using logic as such. As I mentioned yesterday, the other day, Pramanavartika mentions or proves the Four Noble Truths and so forth through reason. So if we only have to resort to the Pali tradition, we would have, with regard to many points, we would have to say, oh, this is so because the Buddha said so. So when we refer to Pali tradition as the lesser vehicle and so forth, I mean, we tend to actually have this attitude of looking down upon the Pali tradition and considering ourselves, regarding ourselves as the Mahayanists. So this is not good to have this kind of discrimination. So the Buddha taught what is contained in the Pali teachings were taught by the Buddha himself, and which were later put into letters. And then in the Mahayana teaching, the points of are more elaborated. And so it is very important. The Pali tradition is very important for us. So in reality, if you actually have to rely on the Pali tradition alone, then you would only have to resort to scripture, to the Buddha. Whereas in the Sanskrit tradition, that's not the case. We have reasons to say that the Buddha has said such and such because of this and that, and therefore we could say this is so because of this reason, because that is so because of that reason, and so forth. And so the Sanskrit tradition is very important. So the Mahayana scriptures, such as the Dharamsala Sutra, are very important, it mentions. So one Pali tradition teacher, whom I know, so we really talk about selflessness many times, but I didn't understand what selflessness meant until today. So he was in one of my teachings, and then that's what he said. as I explained what selfness meant. And therefore, the Sanskrit tradition of teaching contained in the Kanjur are very important. And also the teachings contained in the Tengyur, the translated commentarial treatises by Nagarjuna and so forth, are very important. The cause of suffering cannot be, or the origin of suffering, because it is the cause of suffering, like sword blow and so forth, and because it is mental phenomena like the path. We do not think that cognition has the cause of suffering as its object. It's true because it is cognition of form of suffering and so forth, like different cognition of cause of suffering. Now that the origin of suffering has been negated in this way, the next verse negates the truth of cessation. So when we talk about impermanence leading to understanding of the suffering, it has to be understood in relation to our contaminated psychophysical aggregates, because the cause of these psychophysical aggregates, this impure psychophysical aggregate that we have, are karma and delusions, and therefore this body and the mind-body combination is in the nature of suffering, because they are under the influence of ignorance. So because of being under the influence of ignorance and the other mental afflictions, this kind of body and mind that we have are in the nature of suffering. And so this understanding this is very important. So there is this qualm that is raised. The cessation of something has not arisen is ultimately not cessation, because it's the cessation of something that has not arisen, like cessation that is not due to discernment. If there cannot be any cessation, where does your path lead? And if the path does not arise, how can it be path? And whom does it cause to attain this cessation? The path does not cause anyone to attain liberation because it is conditioned like another path, or because it has cessation as its object like another cognition of cessation. Right vision of the Four Noble Truths should be considered false because it has universals as its object, or because it is conditioned like a false cognition. Ultimately, it is not reasonable for the truth of the path to be true, because right thinking, right effort, and so forth are false. Then how should the path be truly understood? It is not reasonable to practice it in this way, but it is reasonable to practice it by not seeing the Four Noble Truths, because the actual state of the thing is that is seen is always to be unseen. Someone may say an idiot cannot be liberated because he does not see the truth, like a fool, and the same is true of you. If there is no suffering, and so no one who suffers, who wants liberation from what? People speak of liberation erroneously, like a product of illusion. Likewise, we think that liberation is the complete no vision of the Four Noble Truths. So, the example is impossible and the reason is accepted. This very same path, beginning with the right vision, is taught in the Mahayana, so the reason is unaccepted. Everything that is well spoken in the Vedanta is taught by the Buddha. Therefore, either the example is deficient or should be analyzed, or one should analyze its ambiguity. If we practice wisdom in a way that excludes the concepts of being and non-being, to whom and for what reason do you attribute the view that denies cause and effect? The reason is unaccepted because we do not deny the connection between cause and effect as it is understood in the world. So not seeing is the ultimate seeing, is mentioned. In the auto commentary to this text, Bhavavieka mentions Asanga and Vasubandhu, that they do not follow Master Nagarjuna's system, but taught that they taught the non-duality of subject and object, which is, apart from what Master Nagarjuna has taught, and for that they are shameless. Ordinary people do not have as their object the reality of material form because they do not develop inner wisdom, just as they do not have their object emptiness of the self and so forth. Ordinary people do not have an ultimate cognition of reality of material form because they are blinded by the impediment of ignorance, just as they do not have the cognition in which nirvana is the object because of the qualification. In reality, things do not exist. Perception and common sense do not contradict it. So where is the contradiction? Since there ultimately is no female identity, what dharmas are as peaceful as space, how can you think that this example contradicts anything? If you want to refute us, you have to prove that there can be sex with a woman who is permissible for sex, but just as you have proved that there is a woman who is permissible for sex, man have sex with her and the action of having sex with her. If it is true that this assertion contradicts common sense, but we do not accept that it applies to this qualification, so this fake inference is incapable of contradicting our thesis. Scholars know reality as free from conceptual diversity, directly known, free from the stains of concepts, not one, not many, and peaceful. So it is not reasonable for teaching of the Yogacara to be reality because they say that this God comes from the first God and so forth. We think that this existence of the sense media that begin with the material form is knowable. If you are arguing that these sense media exist in the general sense, we agree. We think that the sense media beginning with the material form are not defined as gross elements or as derivatives of those gross elements, because they cause the birth of a cognition of appearance of their own identities, like the mind. It's generally accepted that mind and mental phenomena have the nature of mind and mental phenomena. Ultimately, practitioners have no position, so they have no reason or example. So we reject the claim that mind only is meant to deny the existence of external objects. So how can there be a problem with our position? So what this refers to is that when the Buddha mentions that the whole the three realms of existence are mere mind, and he did not actually literally mean there are mind as such, but he wished to avoid the attachment to external things, for beings to avoid the external attachments to external things. So one does not calm the mind without using words. Let scholars understand which words have substance and which do not. So that's the end of the 4th chapter. First, I'll have a hot tea. If there is a blessing, I would have a blessing with this hot tea when it's cold. little too hot. La, chen lem da do drin del. Jiglora ya sia ma la jil ya ma la. Ni po po ju de. Chidong. Chidong. Po po ju de di su de. Po po ju de. Half. Chega logo. Outro. Mo. Dear decide. Codas. Chiri mare. Feed. Tishin on the south. So I'm on page 57. Finished quite a bit. I think I can finish tomorrow. So, day after tomorrow, I wish to do blessing of Manjushri for increasing our wisdom, intelligence, and wisdom. Manjushri is the special deity. So I'm thinking of doing Janang of Manjushri. The most important thing for developing our wisdom and intelligence is to do study, and to complement that, if you do prayers to Manjushri and recite Arabhasana mantra, it really will help. So, in Buddhism, it's very important to, if without intelligence, it's very difficult to fathom the teaching. In the past, one time when I went to Darjeeling, we had a teaching outside. It was very cold. And I said, today all of us would be meditators, so I covered my head with my upper robe. So some of the people in the audience were very happy to have the opportunity to cover their head with their robes. So those of you who are here too, let us all be meditators again here. Cover our head. So His Holiness is pointing to some bald monk. Looks like he's feeling very cold, he says. Last year or the year before that, some Muslim women came to see me. So I said, I'm going to be a Muslim lady. I covered my head like this with my robes. So since it's cold, if you feel cold in your head, then please cover your head. So I usually jokingly tell people in the central part of Tibet, So in the cold weather, the earth breaks, then the stone, and then lastly the monks or the nuns' head breaks. Cracks. Where is tea? Where's the person who brings me tea? Please add more honey to my tea. Oh my. Analysis of the reality of the Yogacaras. The scholars who are proud of their own system say the Yogacaras have given the correct explanation of the introduction to ambrosia of reality. So this is the refutation of the Chittamatras. So Master Sangha and Vasubandhu says so. The Yogacaras, like Sangha and Vasubandhu, think that ultimately is the object of cognition of existence and absence, because it is the existence of the absence of duality, or because it is the absence of duality. So the Chittamatras' non-duality of subject and object is rejected. The ultimate is the existence of an absence, no selflessness, and the actual state of things, and the object of non-conceptual cognition. It also is a realization of the object. From apprehension comes non-apprehension. From non-apprehension comes no apprehension. Those who see reality see absolute identity when they do not apprehend imagined identity and do not grasp dependent reality. So the Chittamatras assert 8 types of consciousness. Those who see reality see absolute identity when they do not apprehend imagined identity and do not grasp dependent identity. We think that dependent identity exists because designations have causes, because otherwise neither would not exist, and because one apprehends defilements. This approach to the perfection of wisdom is the means to attain omniscience, and the one that concentrates on the negation of arising and cessation is not. In response, we say all the Tathagata's teachings are authoritative for us because they are authoritative teaching of a reliable person. Clearly, clearly a good person understands. So the Chittamatras say that, mention the 3 categories of phenomena, which are the imputed nature, the dependent nature, and the perfect nature. So the perfect nature is that of selflessness or emptiness, which is the absence of the imputed nature from that of the dependent nature. So the Chittamatras mention their position. in response, all the Tathagata's teachings are authoritative for us. This is a response to the Chittamatras, claiming that the mind only and so forth are actually the teaching of the Buddha. That should be taken literally, meaning that nothing externally exists and so forth. But the opponent, whose mind is confused and misled by the other traditions, does not. For this reason, one should follow a rational approach so that he will understand. The existence of absence of duality is clearly unreasonable because it is contradictory. You should not imagine that this absence exists unless the absence of a flower in the sky also exists. If the opponent thinks there is no difference between reality and the absence of imagined identity, this is not an answer, because there is the absence of the same contradiction when the definition is applied to the thing that is being defined. If the opponent thinks that the nature of reality does not cease to be an absence, then it cannot exist. If it does not cease to be an absence, therefore, if so, the Buddha's knowledge would have an absence of its object, and this object would not be the self-essence of Dharma, because the cognition of an absence has a cognitive mark. If the opponent thinks that the cognition whose object is an absence has no concept, then the master replies, then the non-conceptual cognition of material form must be correct. If the opponent thinks that a cognition of a material form is incorrect because it has the image of an object, the reason is mistaken and the thesis fails. If the teacher's awakening has absolute identity as its object, it must be conceptual cognition, it must be an object, and it must not be conceptual. It is not true that the apprehending mind only implies that one does not grasp material form and so forth. This thesis is contradicted by the point that has already been accepted and also by common sense. So the Chittamatras say that because of our habitual tendencies that are left on our alaya vijnana, that therefore the different appearances of the object and so forth comes. It is not reasonable to say that consciousness of material form and so forth has no object, because it arises with the image of such an object, like the cognition of material form and so forth in a dream. The opponent's inference is unsatisfactory. Why we think that the dream consciousness and so forth have dharmas as that object, as their objects, so the opponent's inference has a deficient example and improperly denies objects. If the opponent thinks that the object image is the object of the mind, how is the mind itself different from the object image? We do not think that the mind has a double image like a crystal, because it arises in the form of the other, that is the object. The moment a crystal that arises and an object is placed nearby is not the same as the moment from which it arises. We think that when one moment of crystal ceases, another arises. So it is wrong to think that this one is other. Consciousness does not have a double image because it is not different from its potential, just as it is not different from the object image. We do not think that the mind has images of itself and something else like a reflection, because its accompanying factor is an imitation. Thus, the mind does not have a double image. If the opponent thinks that the mind has a double image because it has a means of knowledge as a result, we do not agree, because they are established another way. we think that the means of knowledge is the cognition that knows the object of knowledge. When this cognition is arising and bearing the image of the object, we think that the conclusion of this cognition is the result, because the object has been seen when this conclusion occurs. This is because the conclusion of object is the apprehension as such of an inexpressible particular. So the opponent wants to say that the external objects have nature of mind because they are objects of cognition, like the immediately preceding cognition. The reason is inconclusive with regard to individual mental phenomena, because the traditional teaching of mind only is meant to deny that there is an agent and a subject of experience. And if the opponent argues the consciousness is empty of a conceptualized object, this does not rule out objects, because there is an object that is not conceptualized. It is uncertain whether dream consciousness has an object that is not conceptualized. If the opponent thinks that dream consciousness has no object, this is not true, because the example is not accepted. If there is an object of cognition, it is either a single atom or a collection. But when these are examined rationally, neither is reasonable. Of these two options, the material form of a single atom is not object of a cognition of material form, because it does not have the appearance of the object, just as the material form of the eye is not the object. Similarly, the opponent thinks, if the opponent thinks that the material form of many atoms is not the object of the mind, because it is not a real thing like a double moon. If the opponent argues that the material form is uncombined atoms, is not an object of the mind, he proves something that we already accept. If the opponents are arguing about the material form of a combination, we do not accept the reason, because the cognition arises with the appearance of that combination when atoms are combined with the material form of others. We think that this combination is our object because it causes the cognition that has the image of that combination, like an object of passion. Therefore, the thesis is refuted by inference. If you argue the cognition has no object because it arises from its own seed, mental cognition, like mental cognition, then surely your cognition must have an object, because mental cognition has a non-conceptual object. Or the inference that cognition has no object excludes the possibility that it can be a cognition, and we do not maintain the thesis that the collection is the object of cognition. So denying this thesis does not refute us. Even without external objects, the potential and the material form of the object cause each other. Then what do you think causes the association? Non-conceptual cognition should not be abandoned, because it is noble and because it is free from concepts. As long as consciousness arises, the seeds of consciousness are not destroyed. How can there be any liberation? The image of the world is born when an idea becomes active in dualistic way, because that idea, which has the image of the world, arises along with the self-image of consciousness from its own seed. This world is dissolved through a transfer of potentiality with respect to itself and with respect to the others. Surely the word consciousness represents nothing more than a self. When someone understands that a dualistic, illusory, fragmented, disturbed and selfless mind is non-dualistic, imperishable, true, immortal and ultimate state, then the subject and object are equally absent and concept cease. Therefore, liberation is not different from samsara when it is understood by non-conceptual cognition. To prove that there is mind only, you have accepted that there is no difference between mind and mental phenomena, mental factor, or you have accepted that there is no ideation only. Or if you think that the word mind refers to the collection of feeling and so forth, you agree with your opponent and abandon your own approach. Or if you think that the word mind refers to collection, you may think that the mind is essentially real because there is defilement and purification. There is defilement and purification, but this is not a refutation because we accept that they come from the arising of mental phenomena in a certain way. Just as a stream of leaves and flowers comes from a powerful lotus root, the different streams of rebirth come from the mind, even though it is not substantially real. Do not arise if there is an antidote, but they do arise. They do not arise but they do arise if there is a cause. Here we do not accept the idea that diversity comes from the mind because the mind is not a real thing. There is no liberation for someone who apprehends the mind, but there is for someone for whom cognition ceases. This is not like someone who holds the doctrine of self, in either the relative or real sense. Material form and so forth are empty because they do not arise in their own right and are not real things and are destroyed like illusion. By practicing in this way, one is free from attachment. If material form and so forth are real, then when someone understands them correctly, the apprehension of their unreality eliminates them. But what is accomplished if they are not real? If dualistic concepts belong only to the mind and mental phenomena or mental factors, they ought to continue after material form and so forth are negated. If you think that you adopt another argument to negate this one, it would be better to avoid the mud altogether than to wash it away. We do not accept the argument that imagined identity does not exist because it is imagined like the snake. So, His Holiness wants to take his medicine. The reason is inconclusive with regard to the rope, and the thesis is contradicted by common sense. Please recite Omarabazanadi, Omarabazanadi, Omarabazanadi. Imagined identity is not completely illusory because we see that this example has more than one part. By negating all objects, you make an improper denial of real things. It is not true that the defilements come from the application of words to objects, even when these objects do not exist. Why? Because we observe the animals have defilements, even though they are not conscious of language. So, of course, I'll be talking about this tomorrow, but when you recite Manjushri, you should visualize yourself as Manjushri, and you can also imagine Arabhajana mantra, visualizing Manjushri on my sitting on my crown. In the past, when one Lama was giving a teaching in Tibet, amongst the audience there was a bold man, and when the Lama instructed the audience to imagine the Lama on their head, this bold man was said to have complained that when I visualize the Lama on my head, the Lama always slips down. I'm not totally bold. It'll not do to imagine that material form is empty of identity of material form, because the cognition of material form depends on the words that refer to material form. Material form itself is the object of cognition in which there is an image of a thing that is distinguished from non-material form, and since this material form exists, it cannot be empty.
Oh yeah, that is it.
Toda denju shunglu toba yin lo zhe po ben na wa zel tu su. Thank you. God. So if you assert that there is no externality at all, why in the very beginning do you assert a mind at all? If you think that you adopt another argument to negate this one, it would be better to avoid the mud altogether than to wash it away. It's better staying away from the mud. We do not accept the argument that imagined identity does not exist, because it is imagined like the snake upon a rope. The reason is inconclusive with regard to the rope, and the thesis is contradicted by common sense. Imagined identity is not completely illusory, because we see that this example has more than one part. Even the animals and birds and so forth also have attachment. It is not true that defilements come from the application of words or objects, even when these objects do not exist. Why? Because we observe the animals, birds and so forth, they have defilements. Even though they are not conscious of language, it will not be an that material form is empty of identity of material form. Because the cognition of material form depends on the words that refer to the material form. Material form itself is the object of cognition in which there is an image of a thing that is distinguished from non-material form, and since this material form exists, it cannot be empty. If words refer to universals, the universals are completely non-existent, then it is impossible for them to be empty of the objects to which they refer. A word refers to a thing that possesses possesses are universal because this thing causes a cognition in which there is an image of the thing. Since this thing exists, it is reasonable for a word to refer to it. It is clear that the universal is empty. A universal is emptiness of that which is dissimilar, because it is the cause of an occurrence of similar cognition, and because it is similarly. It is a similarity in similar things. A universal is not grasped unless its locus is grasped, because it is grasped when that locus is grasped like a number. This is why the thing that possesses it can be conceptualized and designated by word. We do not think the universal is different from the thing itself. A universal is one because it is undivided. It occurs in many places because it is not substance, and it is not destroyed when those substances are destroyed. Therefore, it is wrong not to think that it can be recognized in another substance. Not blue and not blue lotus have different forms, so they are not mutually exclusive. They can relate to the same thing because they can occur in the same object. Exclusion of one thing cannot be universal of another because it is a property of the former, like particulars. This exclusion by the other is not a sufficient cognition of such things as the dual because an absence cannot be particulars, cannot have particulars. If this exclusion by the other is to grasp without grasping the thing itself, it is wrong to think that it is this thing itself that is conceptualized and designated by words. If this exclusion by the other causes something else to be designated, then it is not this exclusion by the other that is designated and conceptualized. And so this idea of exclusion, the principle of exclusion, when our language and concepts engage with objects, to understand this is very important. If the thing itself is different from the exclusion by it, then it is not in. For this reason, the statement of the Yogacara approach is not reasonable. The opponents raise many objections, such as the following. Things are empty because they are empty of identity attributed by words, and because these things do not arise in that way. They do not arise or cease. Anything that is referred to by words, by a word, does not exist in a way it is described. So dharmas are not things that can be referred to by words. If the opponents are saying that dependent identity exists in a relative sense, they are proving something that we accept. If they are saying that it exists in a real sense, there is no example and the reason is contradicted. If the opponents say that dependent identity is dependent, identity is empty of arising because it does not arise from itself, this does not contradict the Madhyamaka doctrine of no arising, cessation, and so forth. The sage said that whatever arises from conditions does not arise. So what arises through condition has no birth and so forth is what is referred here, because he denies that it ultimately arises with its own identity. Since dharmas are not real, it is not contradictory in a relative sense for them to be the particular and universal objects are two different cognitions and words. Any name that is used to designate a dharma is not found in it. This is the nature of dharmas. If you think that the dependent identity arises from conditions because it is dependent, then it is real. It is unreal as an illusion, and you confirm our position. We think that dependent identity is not grasped because it does not arise with an identity of its own. If something arises ultimately, it cannot have a false appearance. If dharma exists as they appear, that is, if they are what they appear to be, how can they be illusory? Things do not arise or cease or are not things and are empty because they do not arise from themselves and because they are not substantially real. We agree about awareness only, and so we do not deny the possibility of designation if what is removed and what does not, what does the removing are real, what do you think recognizes suffering? Liberation comes from the cessation of concept and is possible only if things are not substantially real. If things are substantially real, they cannot arise, so no other possibility can be maintained. If nothing is real, there cannot be any designation. Someone who holds, so this is a Yogacara criticism of the Madhyamakas, verse number 82 of chapter 5. Someone who holds this view is a nihilist, with whom one should not speak or share living quarters. This person falls into a bad rebirth and takes others with him. So it is like what is said in Nagarjuna's writing. If you wrongly perceive emptiness, the unintelligent ones are ruined. These angry words are like vomit. They show undigested pride. We think that dharmas are illusory because they have no real identity, because they delude foolish people, and because they come to into existence after not existing. So with regard to the term real identity or the essential nature of things, it has to be understood according to the different interpretations of different philosophical schools. Otherwise, the Savatrantrika Madhyamakas also use this term. It is not reasonable for the Dharma nature to be a non-conceptual entity like space, because space permits a variety of concepts. If absolute identity arises, it cannot be inexpressible because of the refutation previously stated. If it were an inexpressible identity, it would be relative, and you should not confuse it with reality. If you think that the vision of reality is a vision of its absolute identity because there is no other reality, why not think that the vision of reality is a vision of a pot because there is not a second pot? Do not say that the Dharma essence is defiled and purified just to hide a weakness in your approach, because gold and so forth are affected by conditions. The Dharma nature is like space. It is always pure, but it appears stained or unstained according to the impurity or purity of eyes. The cognitive error that consists of impurity and so forth is a property of the subject and not the object. We think that the cognition that has this Dharma essence as its object is not pure, and reality cannot be treated as an object. If reality is substantially real, there is a flood of faults as before. We also do not think that the cognition of that reality is supramentine and non-conceptual because it would cease. Cognition is diseased as long as it imitates objects. It imitates objects as long as knowledge arises. Omniscience cannot occur in a single moment because the cognition cannot act on itself like a sword blade, and because there cannot be any self-cognition. The Dharma nature is grasped by the noble ones, non-conceptual knowledge, because it does not arise. Since its arising can be negated as before, and because it is not substantially real, it also is completely inexpressible. If the ultimate identity is the existence of the absence of existence, how can you be free from improper reification and denial? There is no existence because in reality nothing arises. There is no absence because there is no existence. We think that reality is non-dual because it avoids both existence and absence. The teacher is not free from all objects if he objectifies thusness, and awakening is not an understanding of equality if the image of reality is differentiated. How can there possibly be a cognition that objectifies thusness without coming from an implanted potentiality? It would be like a cognition of a flower in the sky, which also is impossible without an implanted potentiality. You have said that reality is neither identical nor different, only to conceal your own approach. Reality is not a real thing and is not apprehended. So, for us, reality can be what you have said. Reality is a space because, like space, because does not arise, has no particulars, and is unstained. It is also completely inexpressible because it cannot be grasped by the mind of in any way. We think that cognition in which I disease is arising is gone, is supramentant because it is intended to rescue from the world, or because it goes beyond the world. A supramentant cognition is non-conceptual, has no object and has no mark, because it understands the equality of self and other in a single moment with no understanding. The non-arising of Dharma is called the selflessness of Dharmas. There cannot be any sign of conceptual defilements with regard to this object, as explained previously. The Dharma nature of Dharmas cannot be known by logical reasoning because reality is not an object of logical reasoning and is not known by inference. Buddhas use faultless inference in a way that is consistent with the tradition to completely reject many different concepts of imagined things. Then, without seeing, they see all objects of knowledge, just as they are, with non-conceptual knowledge and with mind like space. It is impossible to understand reality as an object of inference, but inference rules out the opposite of knowledge of reality. Differences in other traditions cause differences of understanding. Even when there are no differences in tradition, what other method is capable of investigating these differences? We do not admit that an assertion alone can rule out its opposite. How can there be a non-conceptual cognition without negating its opposite? The sage who saw reality taught two truths because the understanding of reality depends on conventional usage. A cognition that has thusness as its object is false because it has an object like dream cognition and so forth. Moreover, its object cannot be reality. The greatness of sage taught a Dharma that is ungraspable, inexpressible, and not subject to cognitive activity. It must also be negated in the same way. Now, we said earlier that the reality is inconsistent with reason and scripture. This has now been investigated rationally and remains unharmed. Some get caught in the jungle of aggregates and others sink in the ocean of consciousness, but the sons of Conqueror amuse themselves with falling into the abyss of incorrect extremes. So this is the end of the 5th chapter of the annotated commentary. Next comes dealing with the reality of Sankhya school. Chapter 6, Chone Lama Rinpoche. Chone Lama Rinpoche actually mentions that the Sankhya school is something to reckon with. There was once a Gomang Geshe from Devon Gomang Monastery who used to actually debate on the philosophical system of the Sankhyas, and he was nicknamed Sankhya monk. So let us say the prayer of the words of truth, so that you can also make your prayer and wish. Chapter 5.
Shalai so wande me ze de je se je me ye be oi boy ja be ya kai je ye be so ye so kai bo lo so da be shai lo so wande me ze de je re se te me ke me wo bo ja be ya ga je ke be zo ye so ga ba lo so da shai lo so wande me ze be de ai je che re ai se je me ke be oi mo ja be ya kai je ke be so ye so kai ba lo so da be shai lo so wande me ze be de ai je che de ai se de ai me ai ke be wo bo ja be ya ga je ke be so lo so da be shai lo so wande me ai ze de ai je re ai se de ai me ai ye be wo bo ja be ya ga je ye be so ye so ga ba lo so da be shalai so wande me ze de je re ai se de ai me ai cha me ya ga je ke be o so ye so ga ba lo so da be shai lo so o du rajan yave so so male va gande chave gyure ga se she gele ye she no mo ye ten che la me son da cha dong shu da be se le na ga che ten se ja so ye ko se me she ye ya ra shen de le ye du ba jing ge lo che ye da nya jo be de je ye she yo me ta me den da den be ye go do sha we nam je la da cha dong shu da be se le ga che gong bo den se ya so ye go du ba jing ge lo ba na a le zo che le ge ya zo kala sa ro la ye la ra ja de zo ya wa dam je la da ja dong shu da ga che gong bo den se ya so ye go se me she ye ya ra shen de le ye du ba jing ge lo sum le gang ge nge ro chen cho do she wa nam ja na sa me me ye go sa ye we be de za da na la da ja dong shu da be se le na ga che gong 大家